I cordially greet you. I wrote this story to highlight what happens when you set a goal and to achieve it. We must have determination, will, and courage. This is how we face difficulties and present solutions that we didn't even expect. In this way, we obtain the power that, through perseverance, tenacity, persistence, and the blessing of God that floods us, will guide us to go the right way, achieving what we so desire. Chapter 1, The Encounter. As he descended the stairs of that old mansion, his father was ascending at the same time. A chance encounter between father and son occurred. They exchanged piercing looks, a great silence reigned, all due to the relationship between them deteriorating more and more each day. Even so, and surprisingly after many days, Diego spoke to ask for his blessing, as he was leaving, a blessing that his father could not refuse, being of a very religious tradition, despite always wanting to be seen as grumpy and cantankerous. "Where are you going?" asked the old man. The boy explained that Mama Julia had told him everything that had happened, encouraged him to find his biological mother, told him about the area where he could find her, and also gave him the necessary money. "Nothing will replace the love of the one who raised me like a true mother, but this doesn't diminish my desire to know my biological mother. I will look for her, and I will find her." The old man was surprised to know that the boy knew what had happened and made him feel so bad. Then he asked for forgiveness, stammered, didn't know what to say at first. After all, this old man was not good at it, but he did it. Diego didn't want to leave things badly between them. He wanted that moment to serve to smooth things over and, upon returning, they could maintain a good relationship, as they had never been able to before, turn the page, and write a new story. But even more unexpected and surprising was the request his father made when he was just about to pick up the backpack to carry it on his shoulders. He took off his hat, knelt, and with the humility he never showed, bowed his head. "Also, give me your blessing," he said. "But father." "Do it," he responded in that grave and dry tone that always characterized him. After an embrace in which father and son would appease their countless days of mutual reproaches, he felt that it was perhaps the first moment he had his father in that embrace as the father he had so badly missed, not as the ogre that Mr. One always wanted to show himself as, perhaps as a defense against everything and everyone. Diego finished descending the stairs, dried his tears a bit, turned his face to say goodbye again, wanting to make sure that what had happened was indeed true. With his backpack on his shoulder and ready for the long journey he had to undertake, he promised that he would find her. "Yes. I will find my mother." Chapter 2, Juliana. She arrived at 17, from somewhere near one of the towns in the southern region. With her accented speech and cheerful cheeks, she was well received by everyone, especially by Mrs. Julia, who thought, "Finally, I'll be free of such odious chores." What she didn't like at all, for no significant reason, was that her name was almost the same. Juliana. Mrs. Julia knew she had to teach and accustom her to general and personal cleanliness, perhaps wanting to turn her into a more city-like woman, a situation in which she demanded a lot without being aware that she herself was a dirty and careless woman. In just a few days, Juliana displayed a different, renewed, lively image. She didn't have a hint of that shy, sad, and dirty girl who arrived at this house on an ordinary day in April. The kitchen was, definitively, the most immaculate space. Everything was in its proper place with the appropriate cleanliness and shine. On Saturdays, from very early in the morning, the two would go to the place where they sold agricultural products brought from the countryside. This place was a few blocks from the house. Juliana would wait at Mr. Jesus' stand, the meat vendor, to buy from him since she knew a lot about meat, its names, and qualities, and to talk to him about anything, also to laugh about everything and everyone. Meanwhile, Mrs. Julia would buy soil, plants, and pots, somehow seeking, I suppose, to maintain the connection with the countryside and later, all the things related to groceries. Meanwhile, Juliana would wait for the roast to be ready, and her dreams would fly with the smoke escaping through the roof holes. She constantly dreamed of her Prince Charming and her family, whom she wanted to help so much as they were struggling with extreme poverty. Then, with a basket in hand, she had to gather herbs, vegetables, fruits, tubers, and more that, with their shapes, colors, and smells, made this market square a great spectacle worthy of admiration and enjoyment, and after that, carrying everything. She was strong, yes, but not for such a heavy load, which, all in all, was not a significant saving for not paying someone to help them load the things into their vehicle. That was without counting the boredom of waiting for Mrs. Julia to get tired of talking with Comadre Yusnavi, a fat and friendly Afro-descendant woman from the Pacific coast, a flower seller whose name came from seeing a large ship anchored in the port, which had U.S. Navy written in big letters on it. Upon returning, place the plants in their new containers, organize the refrigerator, sweep the house, shine the floor, dust, make beds, cook, and, yes, I'll prepare your juice, Mrs. Julia, and for you, Mr. Juan, I'll make your coffee just the way you like it. And not to mention how she attended to the boys. Despite this, only Diego thanked her. But how did she do it? What an efficient girl. She attended to everyone and did it very well, preparing what each one liked the most. One had to see the seasoning she put into it, and she did it this way to please them and herself as well. This is how she discovered the secret of good food preparation, awakening the desire to become a chef, as she called it. She wouldn't miss a culinary magazine or stop asking her neighbors for recipes or formulations and the respective ingredients with which everything was made. She gathered so much information that she ended up being consulted for her culinary wisdom. The most outstanding dish she learned was chop suey, an oriental recipe made with stir-fried vegetables with loin and shrimp in a wok, which is like a frying pan or pot. Also, teriyaki chicken and other oriental dishes. Additionally, Middle Eastern food, smoked eggplant tagine, almond rice, kebab or Arabic skewers made with ground meat, all accompanied by tabbouleh or Arabic salad, and well, all the varied foods of the region. Continuously, the best ingredient for everything was her constant and contagious joy. How you feel and act will influence what you prepare, was her main advice. She remembered the saying, life is like food, it all depends on what you add to it. It wasn't unusual to see her during the day dusting everything, sweeping and shining the floor all the time, leaving everything as clean as a whistle. That's how she kept the house. It was a pleasure to be there, in that house. She never wanted to be idle, resting yes, but only at night. For what else? Was her saying. Juliana recounted that, even as a child, she would accompany her little sister in games, but one day, they played chasing 3 of the chickens her father had in the yard next to their country house. How difficult it is to catch a chicken, they said to each other. They rested for a while, and then they were called to eat, already gathered with the whole family. One said to the other, when we finish eating, let's continue the game we were playing. Their mother said to them, and where do you think the meat we are eating comes from? From that moment on, she never wanted to eat meat or anything similar. Although she prepared it, she didn't eat it. She would accompany her father, after school tasks, to make panela, which is how the process of making raw sugar from sugar cane is called. They had to cut the cane, make the juice from it, and through cooking, obtain the material used to fill the molds and with the panela, sweeten various foods. Perhaps these experiences influenced and marked her forever with the discipline, attitude, disposition, and strength with which things should be done. Chapter 3, The Family. The family was composed of Mrs. Julia, Mr. Juan, and their children, the eldest Joaquin, Julian, and the youngest, Diego. Joaquin, young Joaquin, as Juliana used to call him despite being a man well into his years. As a child, he was very dedicated to every activity, both in studies and games, diligent, studious, responsible, a paragon of virtues. His favorite games were bearing cars, the top, the yo-yo, the slingshot, marbles and such a rush to learn, he questioned everything and never left a screw in place, as if searching for the soul of everything. But after finishing his studies and just before entering university, despite his interests, his father decided he would go to work on his farm as his helper. Thus, despite his desire for a different future, he obeyed and went there. He became very knowledgeable about the activities and tasks corresponding to the countryside. He was nothing more than unpaid labor as was the custom in those times. For this reason, others had many children, 12 or more. He received very little from his father as payment, earning less than the laborers. But once, just once, he didn't do things right. By his father's order, he had to move a cow from one field to another. As they had to pass over a narrow wooden bridge over a stream, the animal fell, and from there he could see without a doubt that it had died. He felt scared and sad for the little animal and dreaded telling his irate father, not knowing how to explain what had happened. Since this was the time when people moved en masse from the countryside to the city, his father took advantage of the cow incident and sent him away in anger. I don't want you here anymore, go to the city with your mother, maybe you can do more there, his father told him. As always, you can do many things right, but one wrong and you will be judged for that. What better opportunity, he thought. I will study what I have wanted and admired. Law. And so, a little fearful, he applied and got accepted despite the stringent requirements of that university. But what caught his freshman classmates' attention the most were his rough, blistered, and calloused hands, a result of his work in the field, perhaps because his father had asked him to level a rocky terrain to set up a seedbed, something like a small coffee plant nursery in bags, to later transplant them. It was this work that undoubtedly caused those consequences. It seemed like that was the reason for having that flat terrain, more than helping him. He was a good and outstanding student and did it with enthusiasm, but something happened when, after some time, his behavior changed. He became solitary, introverted. He turned into an alcoholic. I think it was due to his father's rejection and the clash between rural and city life, feeling the need to find refuge in something different. Moreover, he couldn't have a stable relationship with any woman. Different reasons always prevented successful relationships, neither with the rural women he courted nor with the city women he tried to have a romance with. Perhaps this also influenced his behavior. He became taciturn and distant, and neither his few friends nor his family could help him. His mother often had to go out and find him wherever liquor was sold or at some brothel and bring him home. Education is a sea of knowledge with a centimeter of depth, and besides, it doesn't bring happiness. Julian, the young Julian, 12 years younger than his brother. Very skinny, with sparse beard, a penetrating, distrustful, and aggressive look, he was the real torment, the great suffering for Mrs. Julia. He studied high school, repeating some years due to being a poor student and a liar. During that time, guardians were called to the school on several occasions, but it was always Mrs. Julia who attended, because Mr. Juan was only interested in his farm, his coffee plantations, and his businesses, never having time for those things. Julian said that everything at school was fine, but as the saying goes, in the liar's mouth, the truth becomes doubtful. She received a bunch of complaints about her son, that he was rude to his teachers, that he skipped school and was constantly seen playing billiards, that he didn't bring homework, didn't do the work, didn't bring the lesson, and also that he had developed the habit of speaking with strange words. His dress, his walk, and his manners left much to be desired. But in the end, he graduated from high school, which felt like a triumph for Mrs. Julia because only she was interested in this, not him. She asked him to enroll in university. "Look at your brother," she told him. "I'll apply later, I need to think well about what I want to study," he replied, but only to be condescending to her and to hide the resentment or perhaps envy he felt for his brother. "And if not, find a good job to see if you're good for something," his father told him. "I don't want people in my house doing nothing." And so it was that young Julian came home late and sometimes delayed his return for several days until this became weeks and then months. The last time the man came back, the first thing your mother, acting like a typical mother, asked was, "Have you eaten, son?" Later, "Mother. I'll take a shower, go out for a moment, and come back." Stealthily, he went to the place where he knew his mother kept the jewelry her husband had given her and stole them. Mrs. Julia didn't realize this until much later. She went out with Juliana, and when they returned, they were greatly shocked not to see the living room furniture there. A thought crossed her mind that only mothers know how to intuit. It was Julian, it must have been him, she thought. And indeed, after inquiring with her neighbors, she confirmed her suspicions. She felt ashamed knowing she was being criticized because her son was nothing more than an addict. Who knows how much he sold the living room for, probably for next to nothing, and all to smoke it away. And so, with maternal resignation or indulgence, she decided it was time to ask her husband for new living room furniture. In the end, he became a drug addict and was imprisoned for consuming and selling drugs. It was Mr. Juan who gave the order. "That boy is not coming back into the house." And so it was that he never returned. Only bad comments and criticisms about his attitude and behavior were heard in the street. Where could he be? Your mother wondered anxiously. If something bad had happened to him, we would know by now, Joaquin told them. And they clung to those words, shielding their doubts and worries. But they remembered him every day, especially when his chair at the dining table was empty. Diego, the youngest of all, Mom Julia and your father Juan's favorite. He studied high school in a good school, entered university where he started several courses. He was a good student, very intelligent but found all subjects boring. He lacked the vocation he saw in other classmates who had known since childhood what they wanted to be. The cousin, for example, always wanted to be a doctor and asked since he was a child to be dressed in a small doctor's coat and ended up being a very good professional in medicine. It wasn't about being the same as others, but no. He was indecisive and unruly, like tools. For a long time he had contracts for remodeling and building offices. He remembered how, since he was a child, all his whims were indulged. He just threw a tantrum and got his way. With his brothers, the relationship was very little, almost none. The older brother, on some occasions, only spoke to him to ask him to run an errand or to wash his car, but he never received thanks, just the indifference that this brother expressed and the command that always kept him away. "Don't meddle with me or my things, kid," he told him. And that's it, never more. Oh yes, only that time when Mrs. Julia asked him to defend him in an incident he got involved in unintentionally, as often happens. He was accompanying his friend James driving his new car, who was with his girlfriend. He was in the back with his friend Dario, James was driving fast and it was raining heavily. Suddenly, at the end of a straight road, a man appeared with a thick plastic sheet over his head to protect himself from the rain. This prevented him from hearing the approaching car's horn, the rain falling on the plastic and the man not looking well. He got injured, was taken to a clinic and recovered quickly, and they all immediately jailed. So, the only way was to call Joaquin, who, with a dismissive attitude, said yes to Mrs. Julia's pleas. "I will handle that boy's case and no more." Really no more. And it wasn't more. As they say, light of the plaza and darkness at home. Julian, he saw him very few times because he arrived very late at night and barely greeted. As children, they were good friends. He felt his affection in games and his company. More than once, as children, he defended him from others, but not now. It's easy to see that now he felt that affection for his buddies, as Mrs. Julia called them. When he was at home, it wasn't his habit to share. He only sought out his mother to ask for something, almost always with rudeness and brusqueness. Mr. Juan, an old-fashioned man, grumpy, strict, and rigid, and yes, quite hard-working since childhood. With a huge mustache, which gave him an even harsher, more severe appearance. As a boy, it was common for him to tie up a cow's legs, milk it, shoe, saddle, and ride a horse, and also untangle the braids that witches or goblins had made in their manes or tails the night before. Everything had to do with coffee cultivation, from making the seedbed, which is what the planting of seedlings is called, first in a small bag and then the definitive planting in open ground. It was not uncommon to see him with a rope at his waist to hang the basket to collect the ripe coffee, run it through the depulper, wash it, and dry it, then take the load in his old vehicle to sell it in town. In that town, he became the owner of several bars, especially the largest one, which earned him greater respect. But he also made many enemies and envious people who wanted to find a way to see him go bankrupt. Perhaps this was the cause of the attack he received. On one occasion, when someone at his country house told him he was needed at the door, he was shot with pellet guns and he was injured. But he recovered after a time of care and patience. Maybe that's why he was convinced that being the boss, the owner of those bars and lands, he could be quite a womanizer, wanting them all, and more than all, wanting them with him, but that only happened in the sector under his influence and control. Over time, he had a beautiful and numerous collection of hats, leather bags, ruanas, and pipes that he displayed on all the walls of his country house. The land he initially had was very steep, but he, with his ingenuity and cleverness and the desire to expand his cultivation, buried a large diameter pipe from halfway down the slope, sending the collected coffee to the silo, a storage at the base of the mountain, with the necessary implements to start the coffee process, near the house. As was the tradition from his ancestors, his father gave him the land he owned during his lifetime, but with his good business attitude, he managed to acquire more and add it to the large slope. But now the big question he asked himself was, what do I do? To whom do I leave this land? One will drink it away, another might even smoke it away, and the other has never shown interest. One of his cows was named Golondrina. What a name for a cow! Sitting on the porch of the house on that land, Don Juan put his fingers to his mouth and gave a tremendous whistle while shouting Golondrina, and up there, high on the slope, she turned to look and slowly began to descend. After a while, she arrived, with her corpulent obesity and chewing as they always do, entered the porch, and approached Mr. Juan, who was sitting in his rocking chair reading the newspaper. The cow lowered her head while he, with unusual tenderness, caressed and talked to her like a child. Then she returned his affection with her big tongue, knocking off his hat, turned around, and went back the way she came. We bought her as a little calf and raised her with a bottle, that's why she's so spoiled, Mr. Juan would say. On one occasion, immersed in the newspaper and desiring a moment of tranquility and pleasure, he asked the lady who helped with the house chores for a coffee. She arrived shortly after with a small plate in one hand and the coffee in a cup in the other, holding it with her thumb dipped in the coffee, to which Mr. Juan, surprised, reprimanded her. "What is that? How dare you?" But she responded, "Don't worry, sir, the coffee is not very hot, and I don't burn myself." And well, that wasn't the reason for his reprimand. As he became the owner of several bars in the nearby town, peasants would go there after payday, and it was common to see one of them already drunk, saying, "Whatever you want, I'll invite everyone, I have money," while back at the ranch, his wife and children were hungry for food and his children for games with their father. It was in one of these bars that he met who is now his wife, Mrs. Julia. Everyone directed their gaze at her, they had to do with her, everyone wanted her. Mrs. Julia came from a distant region with her father and two brothers looking for good and better opportunities for all. She was pretty, but since the bar owner, the boss, the great chief was Mr. Julian, he, without consulting her, decided she would be his wife. Despite everything, it was difficult for her to behave as such, because she didn't drop the habit of covering her face with her skirt when she laughed while sitting. Everything about her was vulgar. She never left her brash and coarse manners. She spoke loudly and criticized everyone and everything, and when she ate, she did so in a way that resembled cattle chewing, never knowing or wanting to know what a napkin was for, then cleaning her teeth with her nails. Her dresses were gaudy, always in bad taste. She had an exaggerated inclination for necklaces and trinkets, but inside her lived a woman of kindness, love, generosity, and character. How proud she was of that Italian dinnerware they brought on their wedding trip and the set of bohemian crystal glasses they received as a gift, along with the hand-woven doilies made in a place where they had gained much fame. Too bad the silver cutlery set was missing some pieces, but still, she kept and polished them, only her. In a special place in the kitchen, she displayed a bowl, or rather a blue fruit bowl, a gift that Mrs. Julia's eldest son gave her as a child when she could always have him by her side, a gift that made her feel always proud. While she organized clothes, the boy played by her side. He made with a stick in his finger a groove or narrow path in the dirt of an elongated planter they had. There he could slide the glass marbles he had, a game children used to play in those times. However, in his task, he found some clods and stones that he carefully removed. Suddenly he found a blue glass similar to the marbles he had. Slowly he dug it out, and with admiration and surprise, what he found was a cup. He then ran and proudly said, "It's for you, Mom. How nice this is." And of course, the question that arose, being very astonished, was, "Where did you get this from?" The boy explained the event, and although it didn't seem true, since he arrived with nothing other than a small cloth bag where he carried the glass marbles he played with, despite this, she accepted it, cleaned it, removing the remaining dirt, and with much love, she cared for it as the most special of gifts. But who could have left or even buried something like this in that place? Over time, they asked themselves the big question, could there be more things buried in that place? Just like with the silver cutlery, only Mrs. Julia handled it for cleaning, not allowing anyone else to touch it. Sometimes, only sometimes, she placed it on the dining table with fruits, as an ornament for a meal she considered special, generally when she had guests. She never used it for anything else other than to display it and to tell her friends this anecdote, which always made her feel very good. Chapter 4, The Senseless. One day, Mr. Juan arrived home in the city, a bit drunk, which was unusual for him, and he asked Juliana for some liquor. "I have half a bottle of liquor that young Joaquin left around here." He put on his music, and amidst his drunkenness, he forcibly and aggressively took advantage of her. To put it bluntly, he raped her. Afterwards, he fell asleep and barely realized the absurdity and atrocity of what he had done. She went to her room to cry and cry, feeling dirty. It was not what she had imagined nor with whom she had imagined it. Like every girl, she dreamed of her Prince Charming. She was sad and quiet, unlike her usual self. She went about her chores, but not for long. She suspected that things could get worse because she later discovered she was pregnant. Although it did not cause her any serious physical harm, as is often the case, she felt immense horror, as her few or many hopes came crashing down. There were so many suspicions due to her changed behavior that soon questions arose. "What's wrong with her? She's different," said Mrs. Julia. "What's going to happen? How is it going to happen? What about my dream of being a chef? And my Prince Charming?" "I'm pregnant," she replied, but with fear. "Stupid, now we're really screwed," she responded. "How could you do this? I thought you were so diligent." "Who is the father of that little one?" she asked disdainfully. With difficulty, she replied directly and decisively, "Mr. Juan, her husband," and despite her fear, she told her about her experience. And of course, a big scene ensued, yes. Very big and very serious. "My whole life ruined by that old idiot," Juliana said while crying. "And now what will I do?" Mrs. Julia felt sadness and disappointment, deceit and betrayal. She always felt that her relationship was secure and sufficient for him. Her pride was also wounded. She knew that Mr. Juan, with his alpha male ego, believed that things and people could be as he wished. He was convinced that with his money, he could extend everything to his pleasure, that everything revolved around him, although he also knew that his influence was limited to his immediate surroundings. He held the belief of his ancestors who saw women only as objects of pleasure and men as studs. For him, this fact was not very important. She was nothing more than a victim. Without thinking of anything else, she would not give up her role as the main wife of the great chief, the boss of the town. And Juliana? The most hurt and wounded, for her everything fell apart. From now on, she will change her future, the one she imagined so much. "Despite everything, I will leave once I have fulfilled my commitment." Chapter 5, Looking for Julian. Diego was already in his last year of high school and had vacation. Mrs. Julia asked him to go to the capital to look for Julian. Someone said they had seen him there as a homeless person. Without hesitation, he went. Many thoughts crossed his mind. Could he be on the street, in prison, or maybe in a hospital? The important thing is that he hasn't become a criminal. I'll face whatever it takes, he thought. Upon arriving in the capital, he immediately went to the place where the so-called homeless or street dwellers usually gather. They received him, but with suspicion, since there is a lot of drug dealing and violence due to poverty and addicts. But how to know who Julian was, all immersed in a somber, terrifying environment, looked alike, dirty, very dirty, bearded with long, tangled hair, some wearing hats, all looking similar due to perhaps the filth and physical deterioration. They were as gray as the environment that also looked gray. He looked at their expressionless faces searching for Julian, but soon realized that with everyone looking so alike, it would be almost impossible to find him. But something unexpected happened. Julian could recognize him and gave him a big hug. "Brother," he said with emotion. "Our mother sent me to tell you to stay in touch, and I also need it, you know?" "How much did the old lady send?" he asked immediately. Then Diego gave him the money, suggesting that the first thing he should do was eat. "It's easy to see you need it," Diego said. Julian took it but replied, "I'll spend it on whatever I want and don't interfere, kid. In the end, you'll understand that she is my mother, but not yours. Ask her, you'll see." Perhaps this was another reason for his unstable behavior, perhaps. Surprised by what his brother said, and having fulfilled his mission, he returned soon. And what happened to him? It was a difficult trip, especially because he kept thinking about the phrase he heard. He would fall asleep for a while and then think about the same thing again. That story must be made up. It wasn't easy, but he decided to discard those thoughts and focus on contemplating the landscape. He needed it, he had to disconnect. "We'll see what happens," he thought. When he returned, he immediately went home. Already sitting with his mother, they talked about the man, but he softened the situation a bit so she wouldn't worry too much, and then he dropped the bombshell. "He told me that you are his mother, but not mine. Why?" She was stunned and surprised. She had always wanted to say it, but never felt capable. She always said, later, and saying later was easier. But now she had to face it. Fearful, with her heart beating faster, feeling great guilt but also satisfaction and talking about it because, despite not expecting it, the moment to release those burdens had arrived, she said, "I am not your biological mother. I have always treated you like my favorite son. I love you and have loved you as the most special of my children." "What? How? I can't believe it." He was perplexed, his confusión was immense, so many things went through his mind. Why? How? When? I can't help these mixed feelings. So much time has passed without knowing the truth. Who is she? What is she like? I will look for her, I want to see her, Diego said to himself. Before you say anything, think about what you have felt towards us and from us towards you, how we have loved you. His mother told him. Then she told him about his biological mother, how joyful, disciplined, and orderly she always was. Ah! And her name is Juliana. She loved everyone, and everyone loved her. Unfortunately, the events that occurred. Because they couldn't live under the same roof, she asked her to go to her hometown but to leave her son with her for at least until he was 3 years old, to offer him a better future, and that his real father was Mr. Juan. She was supposed to come back for him and return with her son. But they became attached to the little one, his fragility, grace, tenderness, and innocence, his games, and love for everyone. In this way, the time extended until he became definitively and tacitly an integral part of the family. Mrs. Julia never stopped feeling guilty, feeling great remorse for the infamy committed, for not having looked for her and returned her son. She fulfilled her commitment, and I didn't. She told herself. But what about her? Why did she never look for him? It's really strange because he is her son. Is she alive, or what? Did something happen to her? But what woman wouldn't do anything to be near her child? Could Juliana be so selfless as to think that her son's future was more important? Perhaps she knew that the baby would have a better future with them, so she didn't want to interfere and preferred to step aside without affecting him in any way. No more. She had to face this situation now. Amid sobs, Mrs. Julia encouraged him, told him in which towns he might ask about her, although it wasn't certain. She gave him some money and, with a hug and her blessing, bid him farewell. She wanted to lighten her guilt a bit, both towards Juliana and him. Go and find her. Yes. I will find my mother. Chapter 6, The Journey. Thinking it over, if it weren't for what Julian told me, I wouldn't be here. With his backpack over his shoulder, he was one of the first to board the somewhat old bus. After a while, he became aware that it was already moving out of the city with a poorly tuned radio station playing all kinds of music. He knew that all music is wonderful, but on a badly tuned radio. None of it. He focused on the landscape, the mountains, some suspended or cut off by fog or clouds. In these mountains and hills, he tried to imagine beings lying down, sleeping forever, sometimes giants, sometimes prehistoric monsters or pyramids, and in the clouds. Horses emerging from a heap, he seemed to see a child, and at the next bend, the wind had already faded it away, reminding him that life is short, it fades just as easily. He also thought he saw a hat. Well, it seemed like it, and a beautiful eagle that, at the moment, was also a shapeless cloud, clouds like cotton balls, and that beautiful blue, of all colors none more fitting. And there? Many were sleeping. How could they, when the spectacles offered by the birds, the trees with their shapes and colors, the rivers, the cattle that sometimes appeared, and generally imagining the fauna and flora that could live in all those regions were so varied and beautiful, how many secrets those mountains, those valleys, those paths held. And my mother? I will see her, I will find her, he thought. How good it will be when I hug her. He was convinced he would achieve his goal. He didn't worry about how, he just smiled knowing he would find his mom. And he continued to be enchanted by what he saw and was enjoying it. Already on the road, a light but constant drizzle began, which soon turned into a downpour so strong it pulled him out of his memories and dreams. The windshield wipers couldn't keep up, the fog was dense, and suddenly the vehicle stopped violently. They were astonished to see a large tree had fallen from the left side of the road, blocking the path for cars both ways. Streams formed from the mountain, where the tree had fallen, running with the downpour, cutting it off. Maybe this fear prompted his decision. He left the papers, socks, shoes, and shirt, and without more, exited the vehicle. The downpour was so strong he could barely open his eyes, something he had never imagined. With this downpour, we must leave quickly, or this mountain will come down on us, as this sector has had many landslides because these are young mountains and also cut very perpendicularly, he thought. There he was, standing in front of the tree. He signaled to everyone for a sharp tool to cut the fallen tree. The signals worked because a group of about 10 men quickly formed, enough to remove the branches and roots of the tree, then they all carried the trunk and cleared the road. So, after this, everyone returned to their vehicles, but upon entering, he was welcomed as a hero with a tremendous applause. There he received a comment that always made him proud. With 10 like you, we could fix this country, said a lady. It takes more than courage. He thought. If only they knew it was more out of fear. He dried his body a bit, changed clothes, and that great effort and the lull of the rain lulled him to sleep. After some time, something woke him up a bit startled, as he didn't know where he was. What happened? Why are we stopping? In the middle of the road was a large stone blocking the way. No matter how much they speculated, they couldn't figure out where it came from. It hadn't rolled from anywhere, there were no marks in the vegetation. Then, with the help of a stick used as a lever, several of them moved the stone to the side of the road. They put it there to block our way, someone remarked, and they smiled as it was just a bad joke for everyone. They traveled about a kilometer and found another stone, also blocking the road. Ah! This is strange, someone said. After moving the stone, they continued the journey, but soon after, they began hearing bursts from the mountain in front. The vehicle stopped, and then everyone, one by one, quickly lay down on the road. However, from that place in the forest, they also began responding in the same way. They couldn't see who was who or where they were, only the manifestation of that violence, those sounds that produced fear, and they were in the middle of it, in that crossfire. As it has always been, some to defend the people, others to fight for them, and in the center, us as the representation of that people. On the ground, biting the dust, and scared. After some time, they got up from the ground and continued. While traveling on a straight road, they saw rows of uniformed men marching on each side of the road. I told you, should we go back? No. They have ways to communicate, and whoever they are, they can intercept us. But scared, they decided to continue slowly, and as they got closer, they could see they were military. They signaled for them to stop and everyone got off. Did you see anything unusual on the road? They asked. And they told them about the stones and the bursts. They put the stones to block us from passing in vehicles. After a very thorough search, they let us continue, but soon after. From here, we must go quickly, this is not good. But suddenly, during that journey, we're stranded, was the general expression. And all of us in such a hurry, they said with concern. This is all we needed. Then the driver got off, opened the hood, but looked at everything as if it were his first time and, of course, didn't know what to do. This one knows nothing about this, and none of us here do either. Almost an hour later, with despair and anguish felt minute by minute, remembering the previous experiences and situations, another vehicle from the same company passed by, but without passengers. The driver stopped, observed, and with the hood open, after a long while of checking here and there, it could be deduced that he seemed to know a lot about mechanics, so he gave the diagnosis and said, "This one has a blown engine, get on my vehicle, I'm heading back to the town, it's nearby and I don't have passengers, as you can see. It doesn't matter if I take a bit longer to get where I need to go." Oof, this is so lucky, many could be heard saying. Anyway, it's another difficulty overcome, and besides, the important thing is to get there, if no more problems arise. Due to being trapped by fear, insecurity, and expectations, there was a bit of distrust among everyone. Why did this man appear just like that, and so kind? Was the general question. Is he taking advantage of the situation? Now there is distrust of someone just for being formal, kind, and that's not right. Some people do it because that's just how they are. There was nothing more they could do in those circumstances, and everyone transferred, despite so many stories with similar beginnings that ended badly. But the important thing at the moment was to arrive. Among themselves, they talked about the events they had faced, hence the urgency. They already knew everyone's names, calling the lady, Mrs. or the gentleman Mr. and the children by their names because they all talked now. They were companions in experiences and the journey. So, each began to tell their anecdotes. How do you like it that one time? And they told their stories. This only reminds us that everyone has experiences, which, good or bad, are events that constitute living. Chapter 7, and it arrived. And so he arrived at the first town, where the search began. He felt a bit lost, not knowing where to start. The world he walked on seemed immense, with so many towns, villages, reservations, and so many places to search, especially without having a photograph of her. He asked where Mama Julia had suggested, speaking to street vendors and people in bars, telling many of them his story, asking and asking until someone said to him, "Be careful, you can't just ask about someone like that here, it's very risky." So, he went to other towns to look for her, but he also encountered distrust and the atmosphere of unease left by the war among different armed groups in those towns. Where could she be? Did she go to work somewhere else? What could have happened to her? He wondered. He felt tired, but he kept going, searching here and there. His determination wouldn't let him stop. He wanted to find her. It was very important to him. He wanted to hug her. He imagined it. One day, he got up earlier than usual and was surprised by the concert of various birds with their different songs. They were hidden in the trees that made up the surrounding forest. How could he have ignored this before? He didn't waste a moment to treasure what he saw. The need to have a place to eat and sleep led him to decide to present himself as just another farmer with extensive experience in coffee picking. He was accepted and, as he intended, he now had a place to eat and sleep. But he was surprised to see how long it took the other pickers to fill their coffee baskets, while he did it quickly. Someone told him, "If you keep picking the green beans as well, they'll fire you." Then he understood how it should be done. He tolerated the food and the snoring of some of his companions, but what he couldn't stand were the mosquitoes. From those high places, he saw the small crops and the imposing mountains with many farmhouses, reflecting on the difficulty of visiting all those houses and places. He then asked to be allowed to sleep in the stores along the road, knowing that many people would come to those places, and he could ask and ask. Some allowed it, others didn't. Out of distrust. His money was running out, despite being very frugal, but he continued. He had plenty of determination. From some town, he called Mom Julia, telling her about his adventures and that before his money ran out entirely, he asked for her help to continue the search. How beautiful the countryside seemed to him. What a shame there's so much poverty. Farmers cultivating their poverty. Now he valued his father's land more, which was like his land. When he returned, he would tell him how he felt about the countryside. Traveling from one town to another or from one village to another or from one reservation to another, he always had to travel by traditional transportation. Since they were so open, he could admire the bamboo groves, which attracted him the most, as well as the yellow guayacán trees that he also admired greatly. "It smells like wet earth," In this land it rains a lot and there is constantly a heavy fog, but it all forms part of the landscape. And of course, with the dust from those unpaved roads, it was easy to guess from the surrounding fog and the cold in the air as well. Despite the cold and rainy weather, he continued the search, asking here and there, telling the same story over and over, without giving up. He had to wait for Sunday, as everyone had recommended. Sunday and early in the morning is when the farmers come down from the mountains to the town to do their market. Which farmers' market? There are many in different places, but he would visit them one by one, or all if necessary. First, he chose according to their location, and yes, he went to many, but on one of those Sunday visits, unlike the previous ones, the day dawned with a light mist that allowed the sun's rays to pass through without permission, warming the usually cold land. The wind eagerly cleared those clouds, revealing the intense blue of a sky that seemed touchable. He went to a farmer's market, asking amid the smell of baskets, herbs, onions, fruits, vegetables, and tubers. At that moment, someone pointed out an elderly lady slowly approaching. Ask that lady. Obviously, due to her advanced age, she was not the one he was looking for. She was accompanied by a girl of perhaps 12 or 13 years old, but this lady was at least another person to ask. He began to explain, but after a moment, she seemed not to be paying attention. Something seemed familiar. He noticed her eyes, filled with centuries of wisdom, were welling up with tears as she examined every inch of his face. He stopped talking, his breath suspended, feeling a shiver as he tried hard not to cry. Time stood still for a few seconds, and although he wanted to stop all that emotion, the elderly lady said, caressing his face with her beautifully wrinkled hand and her distinctive accent. Your mother is up at the ranch. I know who you are, you look just like her. I know what happened to you. I am your grandmother, and the girl is your sister. This is where I stop. What happens next and how it ends is up to you. You set a goal, and with determination, perseverance, and courage, you face the obstacles. We don't know from where, but sometimes solutions arise that we didn't expect. Additionally, we find that it is nothing but willpower, persistence, tenacity, and the blessing of God that fills us and gives us the strength to continue the journey until we achieve what we want.